Good morning and welcome to Visualforce in Salesforce1, and apologies for the late start. We were just having little those technical
reflector issues.
Yeah, some technical gremlins, some of our apps conflicting. Okay, so I'm Pat Patterson. I'm a developer evangelist architect here at Salesforce, working on the Salesforce1 platform, and I'm joined this morning by the legendary Dave Carroll.
Legendary, eh? Okay. Hey, thanks everyone for joining us. Really happy to be here on this amazing warm day in San Francisco. And we've got probably one of many different webinars on talking about Visualforce and Salesforce1. It's a pretty big topic, isn't it, Pat? I mean, we can't cover everything in a simple hour.
Right, we could spend a week talking about this stuff, but we'll try and condense it down and hit the highlights on Visualforce this morning. So the usual safe harbor slide: please don't buy any Salesforce stock or products based on anything that Dave or I may say this morning. Refer to our website for our public, officially disclosed information. Now, we at Salesforce in Developer Relations Group are very social people. We're all over the web. You can follow us on Twitter at our new Twitter handle, Salesforce Devs. You can give us feedback during the webinar with the Force Webinar hashtag. And then we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Google+ as Salesforce developers on all of those. One thing that I should note is that this webinar, and in fact all of our webinars, are recorded and we post them to YouTube. So none of those questions about are we recording the webinar? Yes, we are, and we'll email the link to all registered attendees. And if you have any questions, apart from is the webinar recorded, please don't wait till the end. You can ask them as we go. We have some staff available answering questions. If you ask a question, somebody doesn't get back to you straight away, don't keep repeating it, please. It's in the queue, and we'll get to it, and we'll save some till the end and kind of answer them live if we don't run out of time. And if you have more questions, we'll post an FAQ to the webinar page in a few days, and you can always ask your questions in the developer forums at developer.salesforce.com/forum.
Hey, Pat, what's the hashtag for the webinar today?
It's Force Webinar.
Force Webinar. Okay, I'll just put that in tweet.
It's in the bottom of the slide there, bottom left of every slide. Okay, so we're talking about Salesforce1 this morning. I'm actually going to flip to the app in the simulator here. And I would hope that every attendee has Salesforce1 on a mobile device. And if you don't, you should go away and maybe install it as I'm talking. And this is what you'll see when you pop into the app. You see the feed by default, and what we have top right is a little notification bell, so that'll light up when somebody mentions you in chatter or whatever. And then top left is what we kind of colloquially call the hamburger, and you click that, and this is the left navigation area, what we'll call left nav. And this is how you navigate around the app. You see a bunch of different apps at the top, so feed, people, groups, and so on. And if we scroll down, we can see objects that we've used recently, so cases, accounts, and contacts, etc. If I keep scrolling down, we see tasks and dashboards, and then we can get into our account down there and log out. So kind of useful to know that that left nav is there, and you can kind of scroll up and down. The other interesting bit of screen here is the publisher, the plus sign on the bottom right. So if I click the publisher, that's going to get me the publisher actions. And here we're in the feed, so we've got global publisher actions. We've got actions that we can take that aren't really related to any particular record. So we can create a new chatter post, upload a file, create a new contact, but they're these are global actions that aren't really context sensitive. What I can do is go into, let's see what would work, a case probably, And what we should see is that this publisher is problem with the microphone. Nice. This publisher is actually context sensitive. So if I click it now, I have some different actions that are more specific for cases. So I can log a call on this case, and as we'll see later, I can link this case to a GitHub issue. So that's a quick tour of Salesforce 1. And so the question is, what we're going to cover in the webinar is, where can you use Visualforce in Salesforce 1? I'll give you a quick tour of the basic interface, and how do we use Visualforce, and in fact why use Visualforce, and how to make the most out of it. So within the app, you can add Visualforce pages to that left nav bar. So again, if I flip back now and go right to there, I can see. I don't know, which one shall I use first? Tasky.
Yeah, sure. Let's Tasky.
So this is an app that Dave put together. So loading a Visualforce page with some custom UI. So in this case, very, very custom UI. You can tell very clearly that it is a custom page that we've added into the interface here. So the left nav bar is one place that we can add in our own Visualforce pages, and it's much the same. Like if you've used the classic Aloha, the desktop interface, you create a tab for a Visualforce page, and then you're able to make it available in the left nav in the mobile navigation. We can also add custom publisher actions. So we actually saw one of those. If I go into here, this check-in action is a custom one that we created, and we'll look into that in a bit more depth. But again, it's very straightforward to add that custom functionality to make it available very quickly from the publisher menu. We can add Visualforce into the page layout itself. Again, very similar to the desktop interface. But then there's another way that we can add Visualforce in the form of mobile cards. So if I click into this record, I'll show you where mobile cards come up. What I'm doing is I'm clicking. If this were a phone, I would be kind of swiping left and right. But if you're in the simulation, you can kind of click these three little dots. So here's the record detail. And I kind of swipe to the side. Oh, there we are. And this record, in fact, has a mobile card. So this area here, again, we'll go into it a bit more detail later, is custom Visualforce that appears as a mobile card. If I can scroll down, it's kind of tricky with the mouse. If it were cooperating, I'd be able to scroll down, and you would see the related lists for that account record below it. But that's where mobile cards are different from adding Visualforce to the page layout. They only appear, as their name implies, in the mobile interface. Okay, so Dave, you're going to walk us a little bit around some basic Visualforce in the UI, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what we're going to do today, we hopefully a lot of you were able to attend our Dev Week over the last couple of weeks, where we talked a lot about the real basic kind of from the bottom to the top way of using Salesforce 1 in the platform. And what we want to do today is talk specifically about Visualforce and the things that you need to understand and the approaches that you want to use for using Visualforce inside of Salesforce 1. And so to do that, I'm going to start off with a demo. This is a demo that we showed during Dev Week. For those of you who were not able to attend one of our user groups, hopefully you'll find it very illustrative of some of the things that you can do. So Pat mentioned contextual quick actions as well as global quick actions. And the scenario that I want to present today is one of an individual who's working for a company, might be a sales guy, might be a field service rep, might be even, who knows, a Church of the Latter-day Saints missionary going out and about in the neighborhood. And what they want to do is keep track of where they've been, some of the accounts that they visited, and so on. And to do that, they want to be able to check into these accounts. Now, I've created a quick action called check-in here. And when I go ahead and I'm at my account and I want to check in at that account, I can go ahead and execute that quick action. So I can see I've got a bunch of restaurants in here, and so I want to go ahead and check into one of these. Now, what I want to point out is everything below the blue bar is my Visualforce page. The blue bar itself is part of the Salesforce1 app. And so when we put a Visualforce page up, we can cause certain buttons to appear and be enabled and disabled. So, of course, if I cancel it, my Visualforce page disappears. Also notice that the Submit button is disabled. So I'm going to go ahead and click into RN47 or 74. And so this is another part of my Visualforce page where I can enter information about my check-in. So, for instance, I want to say that this particular meeting is completed. What else might I want to do? Well, let's just point out that the Submit button is now enabled. So let's add a little bit more. Went very well. And click Done. And now when I submit that, I'm taken directly to a task that was created as part of, or back to my feed. What's been done is a task has been created down here in the middle. And if I click into that task now, you can see that it's crossed out because it's checked as a completed task, but I have all the information related to that particular account right here. So that's the demo. I think it's pretty nice functionality. I'm sure that our community can find other ways to really build on this. By the way, this code is all available in GitHub. If you go to github.com/sready, you'll find the repository for the check-in app there. But what I want to do is, at this point is walk you through a little bit of the code for this. So the first thing that I'm going to do is show you a couple of tricks. No, I won't do that. I'm going to go directly to the Dev Console. This is Pat's Dev Console, so I'll open up my Dev Console. And this is where I do most of my development for Visualforce pages, as well as Apex code. It's really maturing quite a bit. So let's go to the directions page, the check-in page. And there's a couple of things I want to point out right off the bat. So I've got this thing called doctype HTML-5.0. This is key to put into your page tag when you're developing Visualforce for mobile apps. I've also turned off the sidebar. I've turned off the standard style sheets, and as well as turning off the header. Now I have a check-in controller, and I'll show you a little bit of code in there in a minute and tell you how that works. But basically what I've done is I've turned off all the Chrome, any kind of standard Salesforce style sheet, and basically given myself a blank slate. The next thing that I've got here is a bunch of include script tags. The first one is for Knockout.js. Knockout.js is an MV star library. So nowadays we have so many options for developing JavaScript applications and a lot of frameworks that help support that development. One of them is Knockout.js, and that's what we're using in this page to bind the data that comes from the Force.com platform to my HTML UI.
So MV star, it's model view, and sometimes it's controller, sometimes it's got a slightly different pattern.
Yeah, we have model view controller, which is, I think, the most common MV star. We've got model view controller, so MVVC, model view models. There's all kinds of different permutations as people are trying to explore the best use cases or the best pattern to apply to various development choices.
And these are all just basically ways of organizing the code so that it doesn't turn into jQuery spaghetti with a mishmash of loading data and altering the DOM. And
kind of, it's a separation of concerns, right? So that you've got a model that represents your data, and you've got a controller that basically handles the communication of the data to the view and the events on the view back to the data and so on. So the other interesting thing about this app is that we're using the Force.com mobile design templates. So we've got a whole gang of different mobile designs, different UIs, templatized in our mobile design templates. And this is a good example of how you might use those. And then finally, we've included a script down here called Canvas SDK.js Publisher.js. Now, this is one of a couple of different JS files supplied by the platform that help enable development on Salesforce1 from HTML5. In this case, this publisher allows communication between different elements both inside and outside of our Visualforce app. And it was, the reason why it's Canvas is because it was initially developed to support the Canvas product inside of Visualforce, but can be used without using Canvas. Right, so that's the initial part of the page, and then the rest of it, I want to just really point out is pure HTML5 and JavaScript plus CSS. So I'm using very few Apex tags. Really, the only Apex tags I'm using are the page tag and these include scripts and style sheets. I recommend using the Apex tags for include scripts and style sheets because it automatically, no matter where that tag is on your page, will end up in the header, in the head section of your page, unless you really want to force it down to be after the code, and there's good reason for that we'll talk about later. Then go ahead and just use the standard script tag. So both of those things will work. Okay, so let's look at the code a little bit. I've got two parts to this page, really. I've got one, which is lines 30 to 44, and this is essentially that list of nearby accounts, right? So it's the search that I've done, and they display there. Everything below it is the details of when I click into that account.
So actually, it's almost like there's two pages in one.
Exactly. It's as if there are two pages in one. And what this is called is a single-page app. And this is a very common approach to developing apps nowadays. The reason why we do it this way is because it fits our model of a more Ajax-y, no full page refresh way of developing apps. And what actually happens here is that I've got this app content, and everything within the app content will be replaced, in this case, when I click on something, by everything in the result page. Now, you might be saying, well, gee, that seems kind of complicated. Actually, it's much more efficient for mobile apps. Depending on which libraries you use, which frameworks you choose, some are more aggressive than others at actually removing what's being replaced from the DOM so that when you have large pages, they actually perform much better. The other thing to note about a single-page app is a single-page app can actually swap in HTML content from another physical, if you will, Visualforce page, right? So the idea behind a single-page app is the single-page app, there's one page that's loaded, and then other pages are loaded into it. That whole page is never refreshed during the entire use of your app. So it's not that there's one physical single page necessarily, but there can be. You can imagine an app with a lot of functionality, that might get a little bit messy.
But the crux of it is that the browser only has to load one page, and then it's swapping content.
And then it's swapping content. Much like, when Ajax first started, it was micro updates. And these are a little bit closer to a macro update, but not a full page refresh. Okay, so let's go down and take a look at some of the code. There's a couple of interesting parts of this code. Number one is the way that, Knockout works is we create a model called account, and then we're going to load data into that model, and that's what's happening with this function that looks like a constructor. So the other thing that's going on here is we're calculating the distance between the different accounts and where we are currently located, and you can see that in this distance function, which is just a common calculation that I found on Google somewhere. And so what happens when our page loads is we call this function getNearby. And what this is doing is this is using Visualforce remoting, right? So I could conceivably have a controller that when the controller is instantiated gets a list of nearby elements. But if I'm going to do that, then I need to somehow pass my controller my current location. And I don't actually have that yet because I'm getting it from the browser. So instead, what we do is a remote action. And the remote action then executes this controller method and does a SOCL query using geolocation to find all the accounts within a certain radius of my location.
This is actually a really great example of what makes these kinds of apps unique. You're using HTML5 functionality to get the device location, and then you're combining that with a call into the platform to find those nearby accounts. So that's pretty unique.
Yeah, and I don't really know of another way to execute that kind of query on the client without pulling down every single account that I'm aware of.
You wouldn't, right?
and that would be pretty taxing. So I'm going to pop over and just show the controller quickly. It's really quite simple. Here's my getNearby function. And all I'm doing is constructing a query to return the information that I want. The nice part about it, the fun part is where I'm using the geolocation. And so I'm calculating, I'm using the distance between the Latin long that I put in and the geolocation of all the accounts within, looks like, a 20-mile radius to return, to filter the data. And then I'm also ordering it by that value, by that same value. Of course, I'm limiting it to 10 for demo purposes. And then I just returned that query. Now, what's returned back to my page is JSON. So when this remote action executes, I call this function here. And within the result is all of the records, assuming that I have my simulator location set correctly, or 0 records. And then all we do is we walk through this array, create new account objects, and then add them to the model. So it's actually quite simple. Now, what happens when we click on one of the records? We start getting into this Canvas Publisher.js, right? And so the Publisher.js allows us to subscribe and to publish events that other parts of the Salesforce1 app are listening to. So in this case, we're listening to the publisher post function, and this is what happens when somebody hits the subscribe button. So when somebody hits the subscribe button, what we want to do is go ahead and close our page and navigate off to somewhere else. And so when that event happens, sorry, I got a little bit ahead of myself. When they hit post, what we want to do is use our controller action to tell, put some functionality behind that submit button. Right. And what we're doing is we're inserting a task. Again, we're using a remote action to do that, bouncing back over to the controller. That remote action is defined here. And we're doing two things. We're inserting a task, and we're using the account ID of the selected account. So we create our task, and the next thing we do is go ahead and create a feed post so that it's reflected properly in Chatter. So pretty straightforward. Now also, what happens once we've executed that action, then we tell the publisher to close, okay, and then refresh the page that we started from. And so this causes, because I started from the feed, that causes the feed to be refreshed, and then actually that feed post is reflected now on that page.
So Dave, how did that submit button actually get enabled though? Can you show us that?
Right, so that's up here in my toggle select function. And what I'm doing is I'm using the publisher publish action again. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm publishing a set valid for submit. What that means is with a payload of false. So in this case, what I'm doing is hiding it. So if you remember back on the app, I'd go to check-in and I could select one of these guys. Now, there's another button down here called back. Right now my submit is enabled. If I hit the back button, then that submit is disabled, right? And so that's what's happening in my toggle select. Also, when I select it, then I can enable that button by publishing the valid for submit message with a payload of true.
Very cool.
Yeah. And so one final thing. No, I think that's about it. So yeah, that's it's all JavaScript and HTML5. This is really fun stuff to play with.
Right.
But the combination of the controller stuff, the capabilities provided by the platform really give you a lot of control over the Visualforce apps that you're building inside of the Salesforce1 app. And one thing that I want to mention is we're not touching on is how we got that page into Salesforce1. Basically, we've created a page. We mark it as available for mobile. You'll see that checkbox on the Visualforce edit page. And then we add it to the global mobile navigation.
Right.
We add a tab. Sorry.
Why not just show them that mobile navigation?
Let's do that.
Thing.
Okay. So assuming that I have a page, I can go ahead and, well, let's look at the page first, real quick. So develop pages, we're going to take a peek at at one of the pages that I've developed. There it is. Okay, so if I go ahead and click edit on here, I want to point out that this is a process that you will do for every Visualforce page that you want to publish this way, is make sure that this checkbox is checked. What that does is it tells our platform that this is a valid page for mobile. This isn't some random page. This is one that you've built that you want to send to Salesforce1. Once I've done that, then I must also create a tab, right? So I've got my custom tab under Create here, and so I've got a tab for
action for this one?
No. Is there an action?
Yeah, because it's in the action.
Oh, is this an action one? Sorry. So it's an action. It's a global action, right? So in this case, now that I've got my page, I've got my global action, right? So little off script here. We've got this clearly demonstrated in a couple of articles and also in some other content on the website. And we're going to revisit this again in other webinars. But putting this into Salesforce1 is just a series of configuration options.
Right. And just to reiterate that, making that page available in Salesforce1, what will happen is you'll create a Visualforce page, you'll go to put it in an action and then add it to the global publisher menu, and it won't be there. And what you will have forgotten is to check that box that says available for Salesforce mobile app. So that's just a key gotcha. I've done it myself several times. Why isn't my page appearing? It should be in the list here. I should be able to select it. Go into Pages, edit the page, and just check you've got that thing selected.
Right. Okay. So let's just pop back to the slides real quick. Here's some things to remember. The doc type HTML-5.0. This is important for some of to get the benefits of HTML5. Some of these benefits is related to mobile development. I think especially are illustrated by the input type, right? So everybody's familiar with an input tag. This is input, and then you can type into it or you can turn it into a button. In HTML5, if you've got the HTML5 doc type, when you put type like date, you will get the native date picker. or any of the other native UIs based on that input type, right? So that's very important. I think we beat the available for Salesforce mobile app flag to death. And a couple of things. So depending on the context, you either have a custom controller or a standard controller. A standard controller is magical in that if you're using a standard controller, you can now add this action, this Visualforce page action, to a specific object, right? And so the standard controller can be for a custom object, but what happens is your page automatically gets the context of that specific object that you can then use to make that action specific to that particular object.
Yeah, the standard controller just does all the regular work of loading that particular record and making it available.
Right, so I want to talk about some other things. One question that we've gotten a lot is, I love Visualforce, and we've built a lot of Visualforce pages. How come they don't look like they should inside of Salesforce1? Well, the problem is that until Salesforce1 app, the pages that you built were built for a browser, generally speaking, and it'll certainly show up inside of the Salesforce1 app, but it will just look like somebody's crammed a browser app into your device, okay? So what that means is that there's a certain number of items that you have to think about when migrating. Now, Samantha Reddy has recorded a really good session that was at Dreamforce on the things to think about when migrating existing Visualforce pages to Salesforce1. We're going to hit on a couple of checkbox points. I think these are mostly pretty obvious to everybody, so I'm not going to go through them all. I think the most important thing to remember here is that you're on a different form factor. Not only a different form factor, but when you're using an app out in the world, on the street, when you're moving around, you're probably going to use it slightly differently. You're not going to be as patient. You're not as comfortable. And so you want to get to what you need to get to immediately. And so you want to trim down the scope to specifically what you might be doing in that mobile use case. Responsive design is a good way to leverage the work that you're doing for multiple form factors at the same time. And so that's another area that I would dig deeper into. So we have some tools that help out with this. We've got our design templates. We saw the use of those in the demo that I did. Twitter Bootstrap is really great for creating responsive design applications. And for those who don't know what I mean by that, it's an application that will automatically resize itself and refactor the UI based on the size of the device that it's running on. Now, it's not magic. You have to specify what you want in those different sizes, but you do keep closer to a single code base.
And that's something to remember, that it's easy to get sucked into building an app and making it look just awesome on the phone, and then your first tablet user comes along and it's a load of content that's stretched across this wide screen because you didn't kind of anticipate that use case. So responsive design is a way to kind of handle that and make your app flexible.
Yeah, and also check out this Visualstrap. This is a community-developed GitHub fork of Bootstrap that's specific to styling Visualforce. And so this will definitely be a lot smoother path for you than just vanilla Bootstrap. There's some other frameworks that are starting to show up. Ionic is a really great framework. It's built on top of AngularJS. It's built for mobile applications, so they've put a ton of work into making sure that the user gesture interactions are very smooth, the animations are very smooth, that it feels as close to native as it can. And that's a big point for me. A lot of people say, well, what's the deal with animations and stuff? It's just a business app with forms. I firmly believe that for people to use your app, like using your app, and continue to use it, it can be enjoyable. A business app can be enjoyable to use. And some of the things that you can do on the phone, just the way that you're in contact with it, are important for that aspect as well.
And at least if you can't make it pleasant, at least you can minimize the unpleasantness.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if I could ever make my expense reporting app pleasant to use.
Well, I mean, yeah, minimize the unpleasantness. At least make it feel modern and like you care. So another good thing to speed development is something called Ratchet. And so this allows you to very quickly create very nice phone-appropriate UIs. With all of these things that speed up development, realize that you're going to have a little bit of a trade-off in flexibility and expression, right? So the ability to speed up development comes at a cost of maybe not as flexible as you want, but you can always, put these things aside and create everything from scratch. Finally, there's jQuery Mobile. Not my favorite library, but certainly one that you can really easily use and leverage to get started building these mobile apps. We have a mobile pack specifically for this as a good jump starter. Now, a couple of things I briefly mentioned. Well, don't take your standard existing Visualforce page and move it over. The reason for that is the box down at the bottom where we've got apex detail and input field. Those Visualforce tags are specifically built for browser applications and will not look right on your mobile app. There are some things that you can use, right? I use the the import script and so on. Also, the flow control like apex repeat and output panel where you're just outputting information and not really generating a lot of other HTML. Those are perfectly fine, and I highly recommend actually looking at apex repeat and some of the other non-UI, I don't know, what do you
elements?
The non-UI elements, I guess. And then finally, we've got the Salesforce style guide. If you really want to make your app feel like it's a part of Salesforce1, give it a seamless style so that people don't even realize that they're using a Visualforce page, refer to this style guide. I think that we've got a GitHub project built by Josh Burke, another one of my esteemed colleagues here, that takes and makes it really easy to apply the style guide using jQuery, called OneStarter at github.com/Josh Burke. So these are all meant to really accelerate the development of your mobile apps with Visualforce. Okay, Pat, I'm going to leave this one for another day because I really do want to get to your demo.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to just talk for a couple of minutes on, we've talked about how you make your app look good. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes talking about how you actually bind into that logic, and Dave actually covered this in his demo pretty effectively. There's a couple of things to remember. One is, if you're not familiar with the concept of view state, this is how Visualforce pages tend to work in the browser. You click a button, submit a form, and there's a bunch of data that's passed backwards and forwards to support that. And it can be pretty weighty, and it's not something we want to do in the mobile case. So instead of submitting forms and going to a whole other page in the browser, we tend to favor single-page apps. So we stay in the same Visualforce page, we swap around the DOM, we use JavaScript to interact with the platform. And Dave showed us this exact pattern using JavaScript remoting. So again, instead of in a traditional Visualforce page, which is perfectly appropriate on the browser, you might invoke an action that re-renders part of the page. That's a pretty expensive operation in terms of the traffic that's going back and forth. In mobile apps, we tend to keep everything much more under control of JavaScript and call an Apex controller method directly using JavaScript remoting and get data back and then process it in the JavaScript directly, rather than just saying, hey, re-render this part of the page. Now, remote objects take that one step further, and this is a pilot in Spring 14, where Visualforce remoting with Visualforce Remoting, you have to write that controller method, that back end of the conversation. Visualforce Remoting actually gives you create, read, update, delete on standard and custom objects built in. So you use this Apex Remote Objects tag you can see there, and in this example we're saying, okay, I want to use the warehouse custom object but call it warehouse for short in my JavaScript. I'm interested in the name and ID fields, and I'm going to pull in the phone custom object as well and just call that phone. And then what's happening here is that this means that there is JavaScript injected into the page that we can use straight away and start fetching records in JavaScript and then processing them in the page. So again, this is very Ajaxy. We have this interface to get you create, read, update, delete, intended to accelerate that development and allow you to really control the application in JavaScript. One tag that Dave mentioned briefly earlier on that is extremely useful is Apex Repeat. Now, when you're building mobile apps, you have to kind of think carefully about what you can make available as soon as the page comes up. Okay, you don't necessarily want to grab data dynamically from JavaScript if you know that you're going to need it from the get-go. So what you can do is use Apex Repeat in Visualforce to iterate through a list of, I think here we have events, and present and build those into the DOM or maybe even into JavaScript as the page is rendered on the server, and send all of that in one chunk to the browser. So a great tool for making that page come up, making the page usable more quickly by sending all the data in one hit. So this is a summary of what I've just said. The only real things to call out here that we haven't mentioned is those input elements. As Dave mentioned, you get the custom pickers if you say that if you're using like input type equals date, for example. Even for things like email addresses and telephone numbers, it's really useful to use these HTML5 input types because, for instance, with a telephone number, you get the keypad constrained to digits. It's just another little convenience for your mobile users, just saving them just a few seconds every time they use the app. Okay, how do we move around inside the application? Well, the thing to do is to not use the standard page transitions. Okay, we've talked a lot about single page apps and staying in that Visualforce page, but you can't do that forever. Sometimes you need to navigate away into, say, record detail or a whole other page. What you will find is that just doing a standard href equals http my page link will not appear very nicely. And in particular, doing a regular link to a record, to a record ID, will look horrible. You'll get the standard desktop page for that record. What you have to do is work with the Salesforce1 mobile app. And we have a set of APIs available to navigate to S-objects, so that gives you a record detail page, URLs, feeds. You can see the list there on the right. And what this does is it works with the mobile app to essentially interleave your functionality with the mobile apps pages in a very seamless way. And I'll show you exactly that in my demo. So let me go to the iOS simulator. Let's see if I can quickly switch to my demo. Okay, I have to log in. Oh, that's always good. So we'll go to, and you know, I've done these things before, and I don't like sharing my password with the whole world. So let's see if that will, if I managed to fat finger it or not. No, I'm here, good. Okay, so what I've done here is, my scenario is that I'm a developer and I'm actually storing issues or problems in cases. So bugs, requests for enhancements, I've got these set up in cases here. But it's an open source project, and I also want my open source communities to submit issues through GitHub. So I wrote an application to do exactly that. What it does is it pulls issues that are assigned to me from GitHub and shows them in the Salesforce1 mobile app. It just takes a second. The iOS simulator is not the fastest way to show an application with any complexity. Is it going to show at all? Let's just flip back in. Oh, there we go. So just a glitch there. But what you're seeing is my app has actually called the GitHub REST APIs, pulled back all the issues that are assigned to me and are currently open, and I can actually drill down into each issue and get the comments. Now you'll notice here that this issue is in fact linked to a case. This is a case number here. And if I click here, you can see the little arrow tells me I can click. I'm going to the record detail for that page. So this is what I was talking about, interleaving functionality. I use that navigate to SObject API from there. And like back works, I can go back within my app. And so that's a Visualforce page added from the left nav. The other thing I can do with this is I can go into a particular issue and I can link it to a GitHub a case and link it to a GitHub issue through the publisher. So this gives me a handy way to set that link up. So here I already have it linked to Fireworks. I can just change that to handle inability to log into Salesforce. When I press submit, so this is pretty much the same as Dave's check-in example. I'm updating Salesforce. I refresh this page, and in fact, what I'm doing here is I'm using a venerable part of the platform, the ability to make a hyperlink in a formula field. But now I'm going back into my app and loading up an individual page for the issue. So again, I'm kind of interleaving. I've got this idea of I've got the Salesforce1 pages and I've got my apps pages. So with that, I'm going to move away and show you the code, because the code is key. So what I've used for this is the Ionic framework, which is built on AngularJS. I'm not going to spend any time explaining Ionic and Angular to you, because Raja Rao has already done a great job with a series of short videos on the Salesforce developer blog, and those are linked from the presentation and the show notes. Well, I'm just going to point out the salient points here. So what I've got going on here, this is the main Visualforce page. This is the starting point when I get that list of issues. And I've got the similar elements to Dave's app. I've got a custom controller here. I've got my HTML5 doc type, and I'm basically turning off all of the standard style sheets and styling. Now, one thing I do have is an onload action, and I'm not going to delve into that. All this code is on GitHub, and that is to check that I do have a token to access GitHub. So I've got a login process as part of this app as well. But if I scroll down, what you'll see is that there's very, very minimal HTML. And as Dave was saying, we can actually load DOM content dynamically, and that's what's going to be happening here. This is my page, and I've got this nav bar at the top where that little back button came up, and I've basically got a placeholder for the content. And all my templates are actually in static resources, and we'll kind of dive into those in a second. And for performance, what I've got here is I've moved my script includes down to the end of the page, so that the browser has the DOM and can get to work on that before it starts loading all these scripts. And this is just the JavaScript that comprises the application, plus a couple of helper functions. So here again, I'm pulling data from the controller, just a standard merge field, because I'm storing the access token for GitHub in the user's record. So it's very easy for me to pull that out into this helper function that makes it available to the rest of the program. So the next little piece of the puzzle is, okay, well, how do I control all this? How do I pull this together? Well, this is what an Angular app looks like. This is like the app definition. And what we've got here is a set of routes into the app. So they're almost like URL paths. So when I look at that issues page, I'd say, okay, I'm looking at issues. I've got this template coming from a static resource, and I've got this controller function. Again, the model view controller. This is effectively my view, and this is my controller code. And you'll notice here, this is a little bit curious here. Rather than, I'm not using the same this URL for resource or the resource merge tag that I would normally use in a Visualforce page, because I'm actually in JavaScript here. This is JavaScript. What I'm doing is I'm using the resource, I'm creating a resource URL, and you might be wondering what on earth date.now is doing there. Well, if you've ever viewed source on a Visualforce page, you'll see that when you reference a resource, you have this long number in the middle of the URL. And that's actually the time right now, and that's designed to always get you a fresh copy of that resource to kind of bust the browser cache, if you like. And that's what I'm doing exactly here. Because I'm in a development mode, I really want a fresh copy of this template every time I go around the app. So let's have a quick look at that template. And what you'll see is effectively HTML using these ionic tags. So this is what's setting up my view. I'm saying this has a header. And this is pretty interesting here. It's kind of reminiscent of Apex repeat, right? I'm repeating through a list of issues, and I'm going to be creating one of these items for each issue in the list. So I have a link that will take me to the issue detail, and this is then just HTML content. I've got the title, I've got who opened it, and this is where the data gets substituted in. This is the user's login name. I get this. I'm using a plugin to get this nice create that time. So it'll say like 2 days ago. This is this AM time ago plugin for Angular, and then I'm giving the it's currently open or whatever with how many comments. So very straightforward, and this concept of templates allows us to modularize our application. So I've got this issues template in its own static resource that will get loaded dynamically at runtime. So
Pat,
yeah.
I know we're really kind of over time right now. I did want to ask you though, how do you debug something like this?
So the way to debug it is normally what I would do is just use the one.app feature. So if I go to like the regular browser and pick up my host name and just plug it in here and say 1/1.app, that gives us Salesforce1 in Chrome, and the really convenient thing here is I can go into my app and then I can go straight into developer tools. I'll just refresh that there. And I can navigate the DOM. I can you can see it kind of flickering there as I drill in. I can see all the source of my application. So there I am, right in that code. I could kind of drill down into the resources as well. They're all in there.
I noticed you're also looks like emulating.
Right. I've set it up to emulate the iPhone 5, and that you see this blob that will generate touch events rather than click events, and that's important for the app behaving like as we'd expect. And it really does a really good job of giving you something that's very close to the iPhone experience for developers. And I get the console as well, so I can even see when I've logged these issues. I can drill right down into the JSON there into the Java object and see exactly what's going on.
So basically what you're telling me is debugging these is the same thing that I would do if I was just developing any old web app.
Exactly, yeah. You just use 1/1.app and you can do that. And there's other ways of debugging that we'll touch on briefly later on. Okay. In the interest of time, we won't go much further down that rabbit hole, but as I say, all of the code is on GitHub, and I'll be writing it up in detail in a blog post.
Right, so we have more stuff to talk about. We're pretty well over time at this point. We're gonna follow this up with another webinar where we will break down some of this stuff into separate topics and make sure that you guys get all the information you need on how to optimize the performance of your pages, mixing and matching Force.com controller stuff with HTML5 and JavaScript, and also talk about debugging directly on your device, which is pretty neat. What I'd like to do, though, at this point, is go ahead and take 2 or 3 questions. Hopefully, it looks like there's still quite a few people on the webinar, so thank you all for hanging with us. We do want to get a couple of your questions, and it is my solemn promise that we will get to the Q&A list and get it published just as quickly as we can afterwards. So let's go ahead and take a couple of questions. So Pat, what are the pros and cons of using the REST API versus JavaScript remote?
Right, so, wow. So I wrote an article years ago when the REST API first came out, explaining how to use it from a Visualforce page, because at the time that really gave you some useful features. You could build a JavaScript single page app. Since then, the whole platform has evolved. The big con of using the REST API is that it costs you API calls, which are a limited resource on the platform. So really, you should use Visualforce remoting if you possibly can, and with Visualforce remote objects, you get create, read, update, delete on all of your standard and custom objects. So there's very, very little reason to use ForceTK, the library I wrote, to access the REST API now. I mean, there might be some edge cases, but I would say use the Visualforce remoting, and as they become available, Visualforce remote objects wherever you can.
Okay. Well, that seems to cover it pretty well. Let's see. There's a question about Dev 501 cert to take into account the new programming paradigm. In other words, will we be updating it? I think that the Dev 501 will eventually be updated. As far as I know, right now it doesn't take Salesforce1 into account. And I think that it's really the difference in building for the Salesforce1 app versus building for the browser is incremental. There's all of the things that you do for your business logic on the back end, your triggers and your workflows and the data schemas to support proper reporting and so on still apply. This is primarily front-end development as far as I can tell. So finally, one more question. Let me just take a look and see.
Actually, I just saw an interesting one there at the bottom was, talking about Knockout versus AngularJS versus your framework of choice. I think we could very easily set up a wrestling match between the developer evangelists for, their favorite framework. And I think the key thing here is you can choose the one that you feel is most appropriate for your application. They all have pros and cons. They each have different styles of working. They all have their fans and adherents. We don't preclude any of them. You can pick up Angular, Knockout, Backbone, Ratchet, whichever one you like, and build the functionality you want to build.
Yeah, I think a good way to phrase it is kind of in current terminology is that we are not prescriptive when it comes to what frameworks, what you want to run inside the Visualforce page. We support anything that is valid HTML and JavaScript and CSS. So, Pat, boy, it seems like we could keep going.
Yeah, let's.
I definitely think we need to come back and do another one of these. I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to everyone who joined the webinar today. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. We're really hoping that you guys, that we're providing the tools and the information that you need to create really amazing apps. And we're also looking for your feedback on the webinars. And I can imagine some of the feedback on today's webinar, but please go ahead, let us know. Tell us if you like it, if it's useful. If not, if we talk in too high a voice or too low a voice, that's all good information too.
Right, and and also where you'd like us to go next with this. You know, we need to cover performance and debugging. That's a topic in itself. But yeah, let us know if there are other aspects of Visualforce in Salesforce1 that you want to hear about.
Yeah, do we need to go back up altitude, or should we dive down into specific examples like using Famous with Visualforce?
That would be cool.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks a lot, everyone, again, and we'll see you next time on the Force.com Salesforce1 webinar.